Welcome to another episode of Drops of Science, the multilingual podcast that brings you the latest updates and discoveries in natural sciences. We begin today's episode by talking about paternity in California mice, Peromyscus californicus, a monogamous species in which the male also actively participates in caring for the offspring. This makes this species an ideal model for studying how parental experience influences the brain and behavior. It is known that in rodents, the birth of young changes the behavior of adults, improving memory and cognitive skills, and reducing anxiety. But what really triggers these changes? Is mating enough, or is direct interaction with the offspring necessary? To answer these questions, Dr. Colt and colleagues created groups of males with different experiences: virgins, mated but without offspring, first or second-time fathers, and males sensitized to offspring, that is, regularly exposed to youngs that are not theirs. The researchers assessed memory, anxiety, and caregiving behaviors through recognition tests of new and old objects, insertion into mazes with open or closed arms, and exposure to offspring. The results showed that only experienced fathers with 2 litters showed better memory and less anxiety inside the mazes. The other groups, including first-time fathers, did not differ from virgins. With regard to the presence of young, fathers showed greater readiness and quality in care. Sensitized males took care of the young, but built less elaborate nests than experienced fathers. Age also influenced reactions. Younger males tended to huddling, which consists of staying tightly crouched together or wrapping the body around another individual to provide warmth, protection, or comfort, while older males tended to prolonged grooming. Another interesting observation concerns the physiological data. Males with direct care experience, both fathers and sensitized, tended to have larger testes and higher sperm count, also suggesting a systemic effect of parental experience. This study shows how paternal experience, but not necessarily mating, see the males sensitized to young, leads to shaping memory, anxiety, and behavior. Fatherhood, even in rodents, leaves a deep imprint on the brain. Let's continue talking about animals, but in this case about the bend-faced crab, Parasesarma eumolpe, whose peculiarity is that of apparently emitting light beams from its eyes, ranging from green to blue, and which could have a communicative function. A group of researchers, while walking among the mangroves in Singapore, came across these specimens, noting how, in reality, they did not actually emit light from their faces, but had 2 bands on the front of their shell, incredibly bright, which reflected the environmental light. They noted this by bringing some crabs to the laboratory. Holding them still and pointing a light source at them, the bands reflected blue in males and green in females. Not only that, the scientists discovered that when a crab is in front of another individual at a distance of between 5 and 50 centimeters, the typical distance of interaction between conspecifics, most of the reflective light reaches the eyes of the other crab directly. This suggests that the band may play an important role in communication and recognition between individuals of the same species. At this point, the researchers wondered what was the physical mechanism behind this phenomenon. Using an electron microscope, they observed sections of the bands, discovering that they do not have any particular microstructures, no iridescence, nor structural colors. However, at a macro level, they have a concave shape, similar to a refractor. It is probably precisely this shape that concentrates and reflects the light in a specific direction. To verify this, the researchers illuminated the bands from different angles, discovering that the maximum reflection occurs around 0 and 5 degrees, that is exactly in the direction in which another crab would be during an interaction. A 3D model also confirmed that the curvature of the band directs the light towards the frontal observer. The fact that the shape of the band increases the light reflected precisely toward the possible interlocutor suggests that it is a specific evolutionary adaptation to facilitate visual communication. But what effect does all this have on behavior? To find out, the researchers showed crabs images with bands of different colors and brightness. The crabs tended to choose images with brighter bands. Since coloration depends on diet, brighter bands may indicate better physical condition. Additionally, individuals preferred images with bands of their own sex, suggesting a possible role in competition as well as mate selection. The evolutionary significance of this finding remains open, but in dark environments, like mangroves, having a system that can focus and direct light toward the interlocutor could be a huge communication advantage. Now let's move to bumblebees and the new behavior observed in queens. In the early stages of founding a colony, queens are completely alone and must take care of all the activities that will later be distributed among the members of the colony. They build a nest, look for food, lay eggs, and incubate them by warming them with their chest muscles. The queen must know how and when to do everything. One mistake and the entire colony information risks failure. They are the only guardians of the nest during the early stages and provide constant care to the offspring until they reach adulthood. This has often led to the mistaken belief that queens are tireless and always remain active, first carrying out all the tasks alone, then dedicating themselves exclusively to reproduction. However, Dr. Peto and her collaborators have discovered that in Bombus impatiens things are not like this. Queens take a real break from egg production right in the very early stages of the colony's life. This behavior emerged by raising more than 60 queens, placed in the individual cups and fed ad lib with mixed bee pollen and artificial nectar. After 3 days, the queens were mated in the laboratory and placed in controlled condition to start new nests. Egg laying was monitored daily for 45 days through photographs and observations. The experimental conditions varied. Some queens were alone, others were accompanied by workers, others received manipulations in the quantity or stage of the brood. The aim was to understand if and how the reproductive rhythm changed based on the social context. In all cases, a few days after the start of nesting, the queen entered a pause phase, completely ceasing laying. This pause lasted on average 7 days and ended only when more advanced stages of brood were present in the nest. But that's not all. The manipulation of the presence of workers or of the larvae influenced the queen's behavior. In the presence of workers, the rate of egg laying increased significantly. The queen could delegate part of the care, freeing up resources for reproduction. Furthermore, the addition of mature larvae or advanced brood drastically reduced the duration of the pause. The results are extremely important, as they demonstrate that reproduction in Bombus impatiens is strongly modulated by social signals. The queen pause is not only a physiological necessity, but can be regulated based on signals transmitted by the nest itself. This new knowledge offers researchers an important tool to better understand the social biology of these insects and develop more effective conservation strategies. Let's continue talking about behavior, but this time about how laughter can influence decision-making skills. In humans, laughter is often associated with joy or a positive emotion. Although it may seem like an exclusively human phenomenon, it is a signal also observed in other species, often linked to play. Vocalizations are often used among some mammals to reduce the risk that these playful interactions are interpreted as aggression, and at a phylogenetic level they seem to have a shared evolutionary origin with laughter. But what effect can laughter have on other species in addition to signaling a non-hostile intention? A group of researchers from Germany and USA asked themselves this question and wanted to understand specifically whether listening to a laughter could induce a more positive affective state in bonobos, measured through an optimistic cognitive bias, or the tendency to expect favorable results in ambiguous situations. To do this, 7 bonobos went through a training phase to recognize 2 stimuli: a black box that always contained a food reward, positive stimulus, and a white box that was always empty, neutral stimulus. The subject learned to respond differently, approach the black box, and ignore the white one. Only 4 individuals reached the required accuracy threshold and moved on the experimental phase. In the test, the bonobos listened for about 7.5 minutes to an audio that could be either the laughter of a baby bonobo, experimental condition, or a neutral environmental sound, control condition. Immediately after listening, the subjects were subjected to the cognitive test, where in addition to the black and white boxes, 3 gray boxes of different shades, light, medium, and dark, were introduced, never seen before, and ambiguous in their content, sometimes rewarding, sometimes not. The hypothesis was that an optimistic attitude would increase the propensity to approach even the uncertain boxes. The results showed that listening to laughter increased the probability of approaching the ambiguous stimuli, compared to the control condition, and in particular, the gray boxes were approached in a way that was proportional to their similarity to the positive stimuli, from 61% for dark gray to 19% for light gray. These results, at a statistical level, were shown to be only marginally significant, but the researchers hypothesize that this is due to the small sample of individuals used, and hope in the future to be able to expand the study, paving the way for further research on the influence of social vocalizations in modulating emotions in other members of the group. We conclude today's episode by moving to the sea, where exploration and mining could seriously affect marine life, not only those that live on the seabed, but also free-swimming species. 2 new independent studies have focused on the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, an abyssal area of the Eastern Pacific Ocean that is still little known, but increasingly in the sight of mining companies. Although mining is not yet a reality, 17 exploration contracts have already been signed, despite growing concern from scientists. Studies have shown that this area is home to numerous species of cetaceans, including dolphins, rhesus dolphins, and even sperm whales, a species considered vulnerable. The main problem these animals could potentially be subjected to is noise pollution, as many of them rely on sound to communicate, navigate, and hunt. The noise generated by mining activities could travel hundreds of kilometers underwater, interfering with the vital signals for survival. Only 35% of the taxonomic classes in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone have been studied for noise sensitivity, leaving a huge knowledge gap. But noise is not the only threat. Mining operations would raise plumes of sediment that would spread along the water column, profoundly altering pelagic and bottom ecosystems. Food webs, essential not only for cetaceans but also for their prey, risk being compromised. In a still relatively pristine environment characterized by low human impact, the cumulative effect of noise, physical disturbance, and environmental alterations could generate cascading consequences that are difficult to predict. For this reason, researchers launch an urgent appeal. More data, more transparency, and accurate assessment are needed before opening the doors to an activity that could irreversibly damage one of the last deep ecosystems on the planet. This concludes today's episode of Drops of Science. Thank you for staying with us. See you soon, and good science!